Chris, thank you so much for coming on the AIM podcast.
It's my pleasure, Douglas. It's great to see you, brother. It's great to see you.
So good to see you, man. I'm very excited, guys, for the listeners that are tuning in. Chris has had an incredible impact on my life and just the leadership that you have and getting to work with you in varying capacities from being a camper at Duke Basketball Camp and seeing you lead as a camper, then having the opportunity to then coach at Duke Basketball Camp and work directly under you and step into an awesome opportunity to work with your family in a close setting with Spatola Basketball Camp. You've been a tremendous leader, and I'm just super grateful you take the time to come on the show today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I remember when we first hired you to work at Coach K's camp. You came as a recommendation. You exceeded what the recommendation was. You did a great job, and that's why we were lucky to get you over to the camp we now run. And you've been a great role model for my kids. You coached my son at camp, and you've been a great role model for our kids. So it's man, we've known each other a good amount of time now. So it's good to do this with you, brother.
This is going to be awesome, and for the listeners, you bring such a wealth of knowledge from a variety of topics, but especially leadership. You've played basketball at a very high level. You've served in our military, which thank you for that service, and you've had the opportunity to coach at a very high level and work in ESPN and all these different areas. So you bring so much wealth of knowledge in that area. I'd love to dive into it. But before we really touch on those topics, I think it'd be awesome just to hear more about your background, just to kind of set some context up for this conversation and how you've been able to have so many awesome experiences. So I would love to hear more about kind of how you got into the game of basketball, because I think that was probably one of the first things that kind of got you going on your trajectory.
Yeah, yeah. The common theme and thread throughout my life, Doug, has been basketball, and I've never really defined myself necessarily strictly by basketball. Which is maybe one of the reasons I have been able to fit into other rooms. But the entry point or the vessel to get into those rooms was basketball. I grew up. My dad was a high school coach. He put a ball in our hands at a young age, and just fell in love with the sport. And it was really, I mean, I played other sports as a young person, but it was really basketball that was the main focus. And it was a way to get to college. I think everybody's got their path to higher education, and mine was through basketball. Both my parents were teachers. We didn't have a ton of money, and so getting the opportunity to go to a place like West Point, getting a free education, and going there was just a tremendous opportunity. I had never really thought of it. They kind of recruited me. Dino Gaudio saw me at an AAU tournament. They started recruiting me. Went on a visit, and the rest is history, and ended up going there for 4 years. And then 9/11 happens my senior year while I was at West Point, in 2001, 2002. And so it drastically changed what my 5 years of military service was going to be after that. um, Ended up doing my service, deployed while I was doing my 5 years of service after. And then was done with that. Like I had it in my mind that I was going to do 5 years, the 5 years I owed, and then go into coaching. Got very lucky. Had a relationship with Coach K. Got very lucky that he hired me onto his staff. I started as a grad assistant, then became the director of operations, and ran his camp while I was there. And so had some amazing opportunities. Won a national championship with that team in 2010, which is obviously a lifetime memory. But man, like professions or interests you have, I don't think you always have the answer of what it is you want to do long term. And so I kind of figured out coaching wasn't going to be the deal for me. Ended up stepping away from that and then launching into what I'm doing now in the media. So it's been a circuitous path. It certainly hasn't been a direct line, but I've been rewarded all along the way.
That's amazing. Yeah, your story is incredible, and it's cool to see how you've had so much success at each step of the way. And I think you touched on it, like it's, you don't always have to go into one thing knowing you're going to do it forever. You had an awesome career in coaching, and now you're having tremendous success in what you're currently doing. But I do think it's cool to see how no matter what you're doing, you can learn a lot and gain a lot of skill sets in that season that can be applied and carried on through the things that you end up doing. So obviously you have a lot of skills, and communication, leadership, and I'm sure a lot of those things you were able to cultivate and create throughout all these different seasons of your life that ultimately led to where you are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's first of all, dude, like I'm a big believer that you are a direct byproduct of the people with whom you surround yourself. And it's one of the things I admire about what you're doing right now. I mean, you're getting yourself connected with people in your world that are, you know, incredibly talented, incredibly knowledgeable, and incredibly successful. And so that's where I was very lucky. You know, I got a lot of people fooled. But whether it was with the military, I wanted to do my part. I wanted to work hard. I wanted to be my small part of the bigger picture. And I always felt like that was going to lift my tide. And then, you know, then you end up at Duke and you end up with Coach K. And again, how am I in this room right now? Well, let me do my part and let me be a part of that. And then now with ESPN, you know, which is just it's a great company and you work with a lot of talented people there. So, you know, I think along the way, man, you whatever success you have in life is a product of the people that you surround yourself with, and that includes your friends you make along the way. And I've been very fortunate.
That's incredible. I'm really glad you brought that point up because I think this is something that no matter what area you're currently working in, this is such a true principle. What have you seen be probably the most successful or positive qualities in the people that you surround yourself with? If someone's listening to this and are like, okay, maybe I need to do some self-reflection and kind of identify the qualities of those friends that are in my life, from the leaders you've been around, from the friends you've been around, the coworkers that have been made you successful, what are some of those top qualities that you should identify or look for?
Well, I think is you have to be able to trust people. And I think there's two ways to do that. First of all, you have to be trustworthy. And so that means whether you're working for somebody, you're in an employee, you have to be trustworthy in your interactions with your bosses. If they ask you something, you have to be direct. You have to be honest. If you say that you're going to complete a job, you have to complete that job. Reliability is an element of trust. And the more you do your job the right way over and over and over again, the more your bosses will begin to trust you. And then the other thing I learned as a young lieutenant, Doug, was you have to be trustworthy with your people. You know, I remember I was in the military one time. We were doing a shooting exercise, and something didn't go right with the shooting exercise. And my platoon sergeant and I were standing in our TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, and we were figuring out what we were going to do. But we were talking in front of our soldiers, and that was a moment to display trustworthiness. No, this is how we're gonna handle this. We're gonna tell our bosses, and that was a moment to do that. And obviously you would do that if your soldiers weren't standing there, but you have to be worthy of that trust. And then the best thing I've found in terms of leaders that I've worked for, or what I tried to be, is a good communicator. You got to communicate with your people up and down. And if you're open with, and sometimes that's positive, hey, you're doing a great job. And sometimes that's constructive criticism, you know, but you have to be direct in your communication. Great job. We need you to do a better job. This is what the plan is. This is how we want to execute this. Are there any concerns? And I think communication is another fundamental part of being in charge, but it's also in terms of being an employee.
For sure. Now, I couldn't agree more with that. I think when people don't have a clear understanding of what they are doing well or what they aren't doing well, it just creates a very loose and fluffy picture of where they're headed. And I think teams that don't have a clear direction of where they're headed, and again, I think that comes back to communicating that properly from the leaders. I think it just creates a lot of wasted energy. It's very inefficient to move forward, not knowing where you're going. And I think that's a big problem that I think a lot of people have. So communication 100% makes a ton of sense. From a trust perspective, though, I want to go a bit deeper here because I think even just self-reflecting on my career at Western Carolina, I think there were seasons where I felt like we didn't have a ton of unity or trust on the court, but I think there's a lot of things we probably could have done off the court to kind of build those relationships and strengthen those trust areas of our friendships and our teammate, between our teammates. What have you seen go into like really building trust on and off the court, or on and off the job site, or on and off, the battlefield in the military?
Yeah, I mean it's maybe not necessarily one thing or two things. I mean, I think it's the first thing when you understand is trust is not built in a lab. You can't manufacture it. It is a creation over a period of time. And it's again, I mean, reliability is a big part of that, whether that's reliability within your profession, your job, or as a friend. I mean, we all have friends that are more reliable than others, and more trustworthy in that respect than others. I think it's constantly being aware of those who are around you and understanding that your actions and what you do ultimately has an impact not just on you but on others. I'll give you an example. I was when I was deployed, we were I was again, I had a platoon sergeant that is still one of my great friends, that I is still to this day one of my great friends, but he was my platoon sergeant when we were over in Iraq, and something happened, and we were talking, and he was like, I was a little bit nervous. I was fearful. And I think sometimes fear is a good emotion. I think it can help you in certain instances. But as we were going through this, my platoon sergeant, there was no fear. It was just strictly, about the mission. So we were talking later that night about it as we were sitting around the dinner table. And I was like, man, you showed no fear. Like, you look like you weren't afraid at all. And he said, no, I was scared. He said, but I could tell you were afraid. And I said, and I needed to be your strength in that moment. And he said, and you've been that for me at other times where I didn't know what was going on, and you were driving ahead with the mission, and you gave me strength in that moment. That's what I think being a teammate is about, Doug. It's not, sometimes you got to get outside of yourself and be about others, as hard as that may be for you.
That's really good. I'm glad you bring that point up, because I think that's another piece that people can really take from this is there's a really famous illustration. I'm sure you've seen some version of it, but there's a boss that's like standing up on a cart, and his workers or his people he's leading are like pulling him, and he's just kind of shouting and yelling at them to move faster. And then there's another illustration where the boss is actually kind of in the front of these people, pulling them behind him. And it just kind of illustrates like the service component of like meeting your people where they are, and actually like getting into the fight with them, and actually pulling and not just directing. And I think, I've read, Coach K obviously has some incredible books on leadership, but one of the chapters that really stuck out to me was really good leaders can understand what the people that are leading need, from a motivation standpoint. Some people need to be, yelled at. Some people need to be encouraged and to instill the confidence. And I think that what you just said makes a ton of sense, like really understanding what the people you're leading need, and kind of meet them where they are to really get the most out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things I always said about Coach K. Coach K understand tone better than any leader that I've been around. Like, tone matters. And Coach was so good at giving his teams what they didn't expect. So if the team came in after a big win, that was the day that he would really ride their ass in practice. If we had come off a big loss, he would take a different tact. It was more of a softer tone. Like, tone matters and how you talk to people. And to your point, like, different people need to be talked to differently. Some people, like, I needed a foot on my ass. Like, I needed somebody to ride me, and I performed better in that respect. But there were people that I was around who didn't react that way. I think the military, it's also, and it's one of the reasons I think, sports and businesses and people look to the military to learn about team building, because everything that the military does in its training has to do with teamwork and mental toughness. I think those are the two things that you can really build a solid foundation for an organization on. And in this idea of teamwork, like, that idea of individual sacrifice for the greater good for the team, I think that is a philosophy that transcends. It transcends all teams, all organizations. And I think when you're a sports team, for example, you are naturally going to look to those organizations that operate under the greatest set of consequences, which is obviously the military. There's a highest risk factor. And so how do those teams keep their minds under the greatest set of chaotic circumstances, and how do they build that teamwork and mental toughness through that? And I think that's where, I was fortunate to be, both in the military, but then to be in sports and sort of see how those things cross over and intersect.
100%. Yeah, we've had on some incredible guests who have had military backgrounds, and you can just, there's a common theme. Obviously, no one's perfect, but there's a common theme where you can just tell that there's a different type of foundation that's been laid in the mindset and the approach of how you interact with individuals, how you go towards a goal personally and collectively. And I think a lot of the things that the military stand for and that they learn and that they develop and that they build their careers on are very positive things that everyone needs, even at people outside of the military, like you're identifying. But I do think it's cool how you also touched on the element of sport and how there are a ton of parallels, and there's just so much positivity in bringing those two things together, but really pulling out the leadership qualities that other people can, use in their life, but also then go apply them to other things they're doing outside of sport and military.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that idea of looking out for the people to your left or your right. And there's an oath. I mean, there's an oath that you take when you raise your right hand and you're standing up for something that is bigger than you. And I think, that's why team sports was always, I gravitated to, because I wanted to be, again, I'm not that talented. I'm not that good. I always felt like I was going to be better when I was around other people, and if I could fit into that. And so I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, man. Like this idea that, you take an oath to be about others, and it's, never leave a fallen comrade. I mean, these are ideas, again, that transcend. And I think they're aspirational. Like, I think we all want to live that way. And it's not about a religion or a certain culture or ideology. Like, I think that transcends everything. This idea of looking out for the people to your left and your right. And that's, to me, that's trust. That's team. That's what this whole thing is about.
For sure. I want to talk to you about accountability, because I think this is a big piece
Yeah.
of team building and making sure that everyone's doing what they're supposed to do and what they've committed to do. And I'd love for you to use examples, maybe from the military or sport, whatever kind of comes to mind here for application. But how have you seen good leaders hold people accountable and make sure that they're pulling people in the right direction while also encouraging people to stay the course and stay headed towards the goal that you guys have set out to accomplish?
Yeah, the first stage of accountability, it's a great question, is you have to have a set of standards, and you can't compromise on those standards. Accountability is not something that's retroactive. Accountability is something that is set from the beginning. The terms are set. These are the standards that we have. And, I tell our camp, and you heard me say this last year, like, we don't have rules at our camp. We have expectations. And I think it's one of the things with, for example, young people that we have gotten away from, this idea of logical consequences. Consequences and accountability go hand in hand. Um, so it's in any organization, if there is a set of standards that have been established by leadership, now you can better provide accountability. And I'm with you. Accountability is first and foremost. It is part and parcel with developing a team and an organization. And it gets back to the idea of tone. We have our set of standards. If you don't meet those standards, then you can't be a part of this team. If you can't meet those standards, let's figure out how we can get you to the standard. Again, that's part of building a team. And that's why, in sports, this, like, older teams and this idea of players coaching players, that's about accountability. And accountability, when it's coming from the soldiers versus the colonel, is always going to be better. I mean, that's on any team. And so there's a lot of ways to sort of arrive at this idea of accountability, but it's fundamental to any organization, and it will always, at least it should always tie back to the standards that have been set by the organization and by leadership.
Absolutely. I think of this illustration too, where accountability is so important. You can't let it's a slippery slope. Like, if you let a couple little things go, it can really mess up the team dynamic, the team chemistry, the team culture. But I think of like a boat. If you get a couple small little cracks in the boat and you say, oh, it's not a big deal, we're just going to let that one slide. It's not like a major thing for our team. But then those little things just keep hitting. That crack keeps getting bigger and bigger, and eventually you sink the boat. I think it's like there are glaring things that obviously need to be addressed in the moment, but sometimes even the little things you just have to be very cautious for. And I think another thing, you talk about leaders or players leading players, and other people within the team leading other people within the team underneath the maybe dominant or top leader. I think you got to be really intentional about how you invest in those people and make sure that they're holding that responsibility to a high standard, because I've seen it within my personal experience when some of our best players on the team, whether it be in college, high school, whatever the level was, aren't upholding the right kind of leadership tactics. It can be very dangerous for the entire rest of the team, because those, maybe it's the best
Yeah.
player or the oldest player, whatever the case is, whether they address it directly or not, they hold a lot of influence on those younger players. And so I
Yeah.
think it's super important for that investment to the main coach into those other leaders.
It's a great call. I'll give you an example. Because one of the things when Coach K was doing the USA basketball experience, one of the things I always wondered about was accountability. Like, how is he going to find that balance? It was not easier with his Duke team, but it was different. He could
Sure.
scream and yell, or he was the man. How is he going to establish accountability with those great players? And for Coach K, it tied back to his value system. His tone was going to be different with the pros. His approach was going to be different, but he was not willing to compromise his values or standards. And I'll give you an example. I forget what year this was. It may have been the World Championship year in 2010. It may have been the Olympics in 2012. But um, Coach would talk to the team, and Kevin Durant had this thing where he wouldn't look at Coach, and he would be at his desk, and you could tell that he wouldn't look at him, and he was constantly looking down, and it irritated Coach over a period of days. And so finally he was like, I gotta talk to Kevin about this. I cannot allow this to continue. So he meets with him privately, and he says to him, he says, Kevin, listen, when I'm talking, I need you to look at me. I need you to, I don't know what you're doing, and it seems like you're giving me the vibe that you don't care about what I'm saying. And Durant said to him, he said, no, coach, I'm hearing every single word you're saying. I'm not comfortable I'm just not comfortable in that type of a setting. And so and I'm antsy. And coach said, okay, I understand that, but I need you to look at me. It sets the tone for everybody else. If your other teammates don't see you engaging with me while I'm talking, then that sets a bad example. And I thought that was a perfect example of establishing accountability with an understanding of tone, tact. How am I going to approach Kevin about this? And understanding. Like, sometimes you got to ask somebody rather than just going right after somebody. You got to ask them, like, hey, am I reading this the right way? That's leadership. And I thought it was a great example of not compromising your standard or your values, uh, but coming to an understanding, a compromise with a great player like Durant, and saying, look, I need you to look at me. I understand where you're coming from. Let's move forward together in this approach.
That's really good. That's really, really powerful. There's a book that I read in the last few months, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's obviously a very popular book, but one of the biggest takeaways from that entire book, and it breaks it down into so many different things, is learning how, if you want to have influence, if you want to be able to impact people, you got to understand how to put yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from. Because once you unlock that, I think that's a huge disconnect for a lot of people that are trying to make change or get someone to do something. They're just thinking about what they want, and they're not thinking about what that other person wants. And if you can, like Coach K did with Kevin, if you can find a way to understand where they are, understand where you are and what you want, and how do you meet in the middle and move forward together, I think that is like the sweet spot of power and having influence. I think all good leaders need to have healthy, positive influence on their team.
Well said. I agree 100%. And an understanding that everybody in the organization are coming from different places, different backgrounds. I mean, that's one of the things in the military I had to continue to remember, because we're all wearing the same uniform. We've all been through the same basic training. We've all committed to the same oath, but we're not the same people. so you can't treat people that way. And so I started to come into my own as a leader when I started to understand, even though they're wearing the same uniform and even though we have rank that has an implied way we're supposed to interact, I started to come into my own as a leader when I started to understand that each of those soldiers were different and each of them have a point of view. And understanding that I did not have, even though as a lieutenant, I'm technically in charge, I hadn't been in the military as long as a lot of them. There was a lot that I still had to learn. Now, I was ultimately going to make decisions and I was ultimately going to be the quote unquote decider, but it very much had to be a decision that was made by all. And I think once I started to understand that, I think that's where I started to come into my own as a leader.
That's incredible. I want to talk to you about success because I think this is something that gets overlooked. You've been a part of very successful organizations, very successful teams. You've led very successful teams and operations. As a leader, obviously the goal is to set something you're headed towards, you're working towards, and go and accomplish it. What have you seen along your path of how people have the proper way to handle success and not get content and satisfied, but to keep your team motivated and hungry to continue to have that success? Because I think that's something I'd love to hear more of your perspective on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, and I deal with it a lot with young people because I think we have a very screwed up view of what success means now. I think social media has contributed a lot to that. I just think societally, the way that we present what is success, I think is kind of out of whack. Um, to me, each individual should define what success means to them. I find it so funny. If you go into a bookstore, dude, and this self-help industry has exploded, and you essentially find books on one of two things when it comes to self-help. You find books that tell you that you can do whatever you want, and then you find books that are dealing with low self-esteem. How are those two things? They're not related, obviously, but they kind of are. You know what I'm saying? Like we
Sure.
have a society where we're told we can do whatever we want, and yet we're dealing with low self-esteem. I think it comes down to the race that you're running and this understanding of process. And I think we have become so obsessed with the result that we are defining success by the result and by ultimately whether you've won or lost. And what we've left out is this entire increment of process. There are more talented people. I mean, I tell the kids at our camp all the time, there are going to be more talented people than you. Let's live in the real world. But if you are defining your success by those people, then you're going to be very unhappy. You're going to have low self-esteem. And so I think we have to have this reconfiguring of what success actually looks like. I think we have to have a reinvestment in process. And I think youth sports is we are doing a disservice to young people in terms of how our youth sports industrial complex, how we are teaching what success looks like. And again, I think we are painting this picture that everybody is coming from the same place, has the same opportunity, has the same talent, and that's not the real world. And so I think it's a great question, man. I think the best organizations define success on their own terms, and they're defining that success by the process in which they are undergoing in order to get to whatever that final destination is for either that individual or for that organization.
For sure. And, one thing I've always really respected about you and your family and the things that you guys stand for, especially leading at camp and different things, is you have to have good effort. You don't have to be the most talented. You don't have to be the best kid. You have to have good effort and you have to work hard. And, obviously there are other things that you guys preach and talk about. But I think a lot of people in this generation, they lose sight of what work ethic truly is. And I think to your point, talking about like really defining the process to get to the outcome, it's good to have a goal and something you're shooting for. But I think if you lose sight of the importance and the value you're going to gain from actually the process, the actual work you put in to get there, I think there's a huge miss there. I've heard JJ Redick come talk to Duke guys and seen videos of him talking about like you've never arrived, you're always arriving, like you haven't gotten there. He's like talking about the constant pursuit of the process, or just being more focused on your output and not the outcome. I think those are a lot of things that we miss. But I love to see how you guys have really instilled that into your camps, and just try to show kids that, look, you can set a goal, you can try to head in a direction, but you gotta show up and you gotta work. You gotta show up and you gotta do the right things that get you there. It's not going to happen overnight. And like you said too, with social media and these things that our kids have access to, it just creates this sense of instant gratification. Like we want it overnight. And a lot of these good things that we do take time, and you don't get there without falling in love with that process and that work ethic.
And you need other people to help you along the way. I mean, that's the other thing. Nobody accomplishes greatness by themselves. And I think that's where, particularly with young people, they are told now a lot of what they want to hear. The tail is very much wagging the dog when it comes to youth sports. Whether it's families crossing 3 states for a travel team to go watch their 12-year-old compete. Why we're traveling across 3 states for youth sports, I have no idea, when within states or within surrounding communities, there are more teams than there have ever been.
Sure.
But our families are now revolving around the child's sport or the child's endeavors. And I'm not saying that's not a part of the family dynamic, but I think we are a little bit out of whack when it comes to the tail wagging the dog. And that's where, again, this idea of prioritization and taking time away. Like if we're constantly on the road weekend after weekend doing youth sports, that puts tremendous amount of financial strain, time strain on parents. But it also, when does the child have time away from the sport?
Mm-hmm.
It feeds this idea of specialization. And I think it warps this idea of success. And it warps this idea of welcoming people into your life, teachers, parents, coaches, which we all needed to get better. I mean, like we don't get here without those people in our lives who can give us the knowledge we need to progress, and then can say, no, that's not the right way to do it. Why don't you try this? And I think when you have the equation now, the tail wagging the dog, the child's sports are now driving the entire thing. It gives this warped sense of importance and value. And I think you are less likely as a young person to let those adult voices into your life, into your world.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I can personally say that I would not be in the position I am in right now without the leaders and the people and the parents, the people that believed in me and supported me. You just, as a young person, and I'm still a young person. I'm not not trying to claim like all this wisdom, but you're in such an malleable phase. You don't know certain things. And I think the kids that go into this with this, the confidence is really good. You need to have confidence, but if you think you know everything and you think you have it all figured out, you're gonna fail. You're gonna crash, and failing is not necessarily a bad thing. But you could have so much more success and have so much more growth and development if you're more open-minded to hearing people with experience and wisdom. You've poured in a ton into my life. I've had other coaches and people around the game of basketball that have been tremendously impactful and really helped set me up, and honestly probably cut some time, or help me avoid some mistakes. I definitely made mistakes, but definitely avoided some that I would have probably made without the great leadership of the people that have come to my life through the sport of basketball. But I think you're totally right, and I think this is just hopefully a wake-up call or some encouragement for people listening that may be in a position of leadership, or a parent, or someone that has an impact, to really take that seriously, because it really is a really important thing for us to be mindful of how we are investing in our youth. And you guys do such a good job of that at camp, but I think it's really, really important that we talk about it and that we're mindful of it.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I think young people, they have a thirst for that. They just, you know, every I've said this all the time. I mean, every generation thinks that the next one represents the decline, but like we're the ones parenting them, we're the ones teaching them, we're the ones coaching them. And it gets back to your initial point about accountability. I mean, that's what this comes back to. It's just about holding young people or anybody accountable to a standard. And I think a big part of that is learning. I mean, one of the things I admire about you, Doug, is you are constantly have a thirst to learn. You are constantly learning. And I think that's one of the things we've gotten away from with young people, because again, this definition of success, young people don't want to look silly. And so they're less likely to try new things. And that's it to learn something new. learn it for the first time, and try your best immediately at it. It takes courage. There's a level of bravery that goes with that. But I mean, you're a good example. Like you are not getting better. You are not living if you are not learning. That's what this whole thing is about. And you're not going to get the answers strictly from the internet or from social media. You need other people. You need people who have experience, people who have wisdom to be able to provide that for you.
No, that's 100% true. I think even with social media, I think a lot of times people get so scared because it's so public. Everything you put out is instantly judged, as soon as you put something out there. And I think some of these kids have, struggle with that. Whereas if you were acting in a more of a private setting, you probably don't have as much fear knowing that other people aren't going to judge you. And I think that's something that even adults probably deal with. I'm sure to some extent, what you say, what you do when you speak, that's why public speaking is such a fear for many people, because as soon as they get up and put themselves in front of others and speak, they're instantly, in a position to be judged. And, you probably have some take on that. You do a ton of public speaking and a ton of speaking, but I think that's a place where we can see a lot of growth if we coach it, if we mentor it, if we lead it the right way of just showing kids that, it's not a bad thing to be fearful, but you have to go about it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Fear is a big part of it. Fear is one of the base human emotions. And I think it's in the thing we fear usually the most is the unknown. And I think that ties back into that learning piece. And I think getting young people over that fear of the unknown and saying, look, just try this. And you're gonna make a mistake at it, but try it again. Okay, you made a different mistake. Try it again. And when that becomes habitual, when that becomes a habit, the idea of trying something, failing at it, picking yourself up and trying it again, when that becomes habitual, then I think you're on the road to success, at least in my experience.
No, I agree. I agree. If you can break it down and like learn as much as you can, try as much as you can, and just repeat that process, it's like you never truly lose. You only lose when you quit and when you stop. Like the failure,
Yeah.
like you said, is just an opportunity to learn. Obviously, you don't seek out to fail, but you can't be scared of it where it paralyzes you to not move forward. Because I think at the end of the day, as long as you keep moving forward and the people you surround yourself with, like to your initial point, which is kind of set up this whole conversation, those people are going to be so impactful. But just continuing to push forward, push forward, push forward, and learn from every single act, every single conversation, the exposure and the experience from the people you're surrounding yourself with, and use it to your advantage. I think a lot of times we try to close in, look at ourselves, and not get that help. But I think that's a huge miss, with young people for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I think too that and this again, I think this is a base level human emotion is insecurity. And I think, insecurity and envy go hand in hand. And I think, I had a friend of mine one time who's a singer, and he's in his 40s now, and he's the best he's ever been. And I asked him one time, I was like, why are you so good now? Like, why are you so much better now in your 40s than you were, in your mid 20s? And he said, because I don't feel like I have to prove I can sing anymore. He said, I was constantly looking at other people and I was trying to be like them and I was trying to be better than them. And I was envious of their talent. And I just have done this a long time. And I got to a point where I don't have to prove I can do it anymore. And that has made me better. I think insecurity, it's really debilitating, and I deal with it. We all deal with it. Again,
Sure.
I think it goes back to the cave people, this idea of being envious of what others have. And the people that you're usually the envious of the most, like I don't envy Elon Musk because he's got more money that I'd ever dream of. He's got more brilliance and he's weird. I don't envy him. We typically envy the people that are most like us, look like us,
Sure.
are same age, same profession. And insecurity is not easy to get over. But I think when you can get to a place first and foremost where you don't have to prove your worth is innate and you believe it, and you're defining, it gets back to that idea of defining your own success. What does success mean to you? I think, insecurity is something we all battle with, and I think it can be really, really debilitating, especially for young people.
100%. No, I definitely agree with that. We talked about success, which I think is a huge piece of the puzzle. People that have tremendous success sometimes it gets tricky to learn how to continue to move forward. But I want to talk about the flip side of that coin. When teams are going through a tough drought, a tough season, we could talk about basketball, we could talk about military, however you want to take this, or even young people. How, as leaders, can you get your team out of that slump? And what are some things that you can tactically do to say, okay, we're not headed in the direction that we need to go. We need to shift course, or else we will not get there. What are some things that leaders can do in those seasons, or maybe you have some stories or things to share on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you a great story. I've told this one before. That team in 2010 that won a national championship when I was at Duke, middle of the season, we had gone on the road to NC State and we played terribly. I mean, we were just terrible. And we get back home and coach, talks to the team and sends them on their way. And we get into the coach's office there and coach, he says, I want to hear what you guys have to say. And he's talking to our staff, and it was Steve Wojciechowski, Chris Collins, Nate James, Chris Carrawell. And I was sitting at the end of the table, and he says, I want to hear what you guys think. And so those guys, all of us, we were kind of, well, we got to run them until they puke, and, we should kick them out of the locker room. And, Wojo and all those guys had played for Coach K, and that's how he had handled it with them. Now, the thing was, we had to turn around. That game against NC State was a Wednesday night. We had to turn around on Saturday, and we had to play Clemson. And this was a really good Clemson team. Oliver Purnell was the coach. They were pressing. They were really, really good. And that place got amazing crowds. And the year prior, we had lost by 30 in that building. So we lose to NC State. We had to go on the road on Saturday to play at Clemson, and it was college game day. So we felt like we were being sent in to lose, sent in for the slaughter.
Yeah.
So how do we go from playing terribly on a Wednesday to now on Saturday, we've got to beat Clemson? There was no other option. And so coach, we talked for 30 minutes, and that's a great leadership example. This great Hall of Famer who's got all the answers. He's asking us, what do you guys think? So we go for a half hour. We're going to run them until they puke. And he says, all right, I've heard enough. He says, here's what we're going to do. And he looks down at the end of the table and he's like, Chris, I want you to have Bojangles in the locker room tomorrow before the team gets there. We're going to have food in there. They're going to come in. They're going to eat. And he said, and then we're going to go into the locker room and we're going to watch the NC State game back. And I'm not going to raise my voice higher than I'm talking right now. We're just going to talk about the game. And then we're going to watch our Clemson scout, and we're going to get prepared to play Clemson. He said, first of all, the team is tired. And so if we come in and we run them to death until they puke, we're not going to beat Clemson. He said they're tired. Part of the reason they played poorly tonight is they're tired. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get them off their feet, but they're not going to realize that they're getting off of their feet because they're going to eat some food, and we're going to talk about the game. And sure enough, Doug, we get back, we leave on Friday, we go play Saturday, and we end up winning that game by 15 points. And It was really a turning point for our season, brother. It really was. Would we have still won a national championship? There was still a lot of season to play to determine that. But it was a great leadership example, and I think it gets to the heart of what you're asking. Sometimes you got to give a team what they don't expect. And sometimes you got to look at the real reasons why a performance wasn't up to the standard. And sometimes, you want to ask, people in the organization, what do you think? But sometimes as a leader, your experience is going to tell you something differently. And I thought that one example, it still resonates, that was 2010. It still resonates really strongly with me.
That's incredible. It's incredible. And sometimes it's the things that you don't expect, like you're saying, that actually have the most impact and the most weight to them that can kind of help you set to that successful trajectory. I want to talk to you about Spatola Basketball Camp, because this is obviously something that, is, I'm sure, near and dear to your heart, something that you've taken a lot of pride in, you and your family. It's not, you are the spearhead, you are the face of it, but obviously your family is very involved in this, and you guys do a tremendous job collectively. Where did that kind of start and stem from? And how has that been such a big thing that has been on your heart to pour into?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, man. I ran Coach K's camp for 10 years. And then my dad, who was my high school coach, he ran a camp at the high school he coached at for a whole number of years. So I've been around, and of course, like you, I went to basketball camps.
Sure.
growing up, 5-star Eastern Invitational. Like I've been around basketball camp my entire life. Met a lot of great friends there. They were always amazing experiences. They were also tremendous learning experiences. And I'm a believer, Doug, like when my wife and we do it very much together, when we decided we wanted to run a camp, we were of the, and we have some concerns about youth sports. Like I think we're doing a real disservice with our profit model around youth sports right now versus a player development model. I think we're doing generations to come a large disservice. And so how do you fix that? Well, most things, you fix it locally. And so we don't have a massive camp. It's 80 to 100 kids. It's a very boutique operation, but like we want to develop young people one young person at a time. And we are there to teach basketball, but basketball is the vessel to teach life values. We are very much under the understanding that we're not going to have, we'd love to have NBA players come from our camp, but we are most likely to have musicians, have scientists, have historians, actors. Like that's who we're going to have come from our camp. And a lot of what we teach there, Doug, are things that apply in any walk of life. How you communicate. Like young people, I don't know how well they understand what it means to develop lasting, impactful relationships. When adversity strikes, they are now turning to a device. Mm-hmm. And so we want to talk about how do you communicate with people? How do you talk to teammates? What does it mean to be a teammate? So our goal with our camp is we're teaching basketball, but it's about having fun. And it's about defining what success means to you, about running your own race. And as you're running that race, what are some things along the way that can help you along that path? And so that's the goal for us. We are using basketball as a way to teach some of these development lessons. And we are very much invested in that idea of player development. We're not out to make a buck. We are, people who work our camp like you did are people who I think are the role models young people should have. Again, it's local. There's nothing wrong with looking up to Steph Curry or LeBron James, but our campers, they're not going to fit that profile. But there is something good about looking up to a Doug Elks. And so that's what we want to use our camp to do, is to give them a realistic perspective of what success looks like. And we're very proud of it, man. It's just a lot of fun, and it gives us a lot of good vibes.
That's incredible. I'm super grateful for that. You guys, step out in that way and put on the camp. I can attest to it. I mean, the group that you guys bring together is very, very special. Across the board, all the coaches that come and work the camp are obviously very, have a very similar heart, and you guys do a great job of vetting those people and making sure that the people that you bring in to have influence at your camps are, trying their best to uphold the standards that you guys kind of put in place. But even from the kids' perspective, you guys bring together a really diverse group of people that all come together, have a blast, and enjoy the game of basketball, but then hopefully are positively impacted to go on and, continue to grow and develop as young people.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, man. Like I think the timetable, we are trying to slow down the timetable on how long it takes to get to a final destination, whatever that might be. Sure. And I think adults are largely complicit in speeding up that timetable. And look, some people are going to get to whatever definition of success you have. Some people are going to get there faster than others. Some are going to get there in a direct line. Some have to take a more circuitous route, like me. I'm very much an example of that. It was not a direct line. And so we again, it gets back to this image young people have of themselves. We are not all naturally gifted. Some of us have to work harder, and it's going to take longer than it does somebody else. But I am not measuring myself against you. I'm not measuring myself against him or her. I am measuring myself against my ability and my commitment. I'm not saying you don't have to work hard, and I'm not saying, that there isn't a timetable, but you define that, and you define that through your effort, through the people you surround yourself with, and all of that. And that's, I think, where we're trying to come from.
That's amazing. No, and I couldn't agree more with what you guys are doing. Where do you see the biggest opportunity to make that positive investment into our youth? We talk about, you guys stepping out and putting this camp together. Obviously, you do a ton more for the youth, but where do you see the biggest opportunity for just like everyday people who want to have a positive impact and know the importance of this next generation? How do you think they can be involved, and how do you think they can pour into these people?
I think exposing young people to a variety of different outlets is critical.
Sure.
Again, not to launch into an entire conversation on specialization, but and it's not like we have all the answers, but one of the things that we wanted to do with our son, John David, is we were not going to push him into basketball. Um, the inherent pressures associated with who his grandfather is, who I am. I played the sport. We were not going to push him into that. And he ended up finding this sport ninja. And what we felt our role was, Doug, was to be encouraging and supportive. And I think sometimes parents have to confront what that means to be encouraging and supportive. For example, if you look at a youth soccer practice on a random Tuesday night, a soccer practice for 12-year-olds, I have to sometimes laugh because parents are lining the perimeter of the field 2 rows deep to watch their 12-year-old practice. I mean, what are we doing here? And I think sometimes that crosses the line of being encouraging and supportive, because now we're looking at things that maybe you're taking authority away from the coach. And I'm complicit in that. Again, some of it's competitive parenting. Should I be staying to watch my 12-year-old practice soccer? And sometimes I got to pry myself away, go for a run or go run an errand, do something else. So I think, look, we want to be encouraging. We want to be supportive. We want to give the resource that our son wants, but we also want him to know that there are other things in life besides being great at ninja, or now he's playing basketball. You don't have to be an NBA player. You don't have to get a scholarship. Use basketball for what it does. And so that's where I think we've kind of found ourselves. We encourage, we support the coaches and his teachers. That's the other thing I think we've lost sight of.
Yeah.
Like when I was growing up, if I was in trouble at school, Doug, I was in trouble at home. Like
Sure.
my parents were very much in support of the school's mission. And I think we've lost that. And so we also want to be supportive of the coaches in our child's life and the teachers in their lives, because I think that relationship is also very important.
That's a great point. Honestly, that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of obviously you want to defend your child, and obviously you want to find the truth, and be able to justify and back the truth. But I do think there's sometimes a disconnect there where the child maybe is not going to have the opportunity to learn and experience the top benefit of that relationship by not having everyone kind of on the same page, which is so true. Chris, I can confidently say this has been one of the most impactful, most valuable conversations we've had on this show about leadership, about investing, impacting others. So I'm very, very grateful for your time here. As we wrap this up, I would love to hear more about what you're personally doing, goals for the future of you and your family and the camp, and just anything that's coming down the road that you would like to share.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, so I'm still working for ESPN, and I'll be doing college basketball games, hopefully, coming up here next season, and I very much love doing that. Look forward to that. I do radio. I'm on Sirius XM doing radio as well. But we found a real calling, man, with our camp and just trying to coach and help young people. I think my background in terms of in terms of the service and coaching, and then in terms of running camps, I think has become a real vocation. So we're throwing everything we have into that, and putting a lot of stuff up on Instagram and other social media stuff. So I appreciate you asking, man. It's we're in a good spot, and then watching my kids grow. These.
Sure.
These summers are very precious, and there's only so many of them. And so we're throwing ourselves into not missing 1 second of that.
That's awesome. That sounds like what Jesse Itzler talks a lot about that stuff. I know you know Jesse.
Yeah.
But he does a good job of illustrating, explaining the importance of really valuing the time you have and really investing in it and being really intentional. And you guys have another camp this summer. You have another camp
Yeah.
up here in July, right?
Yeah. Coming up July 17th. Yeah, we got another week of camp, and it'll be we got some surprises for that week in terms of people coming over to visit, and it's it'll be fun. It'll be really good. It's at Durham Academy. Durham Academy, when we were like, where do we want to do the camp? We wanted to do it at a place where we believed in the mission and believed in the leadership, and so they've been very, very kind to let us do the camp over there, and it's gone really, really well.
Incredible. I can't wait to hear how it goes. I wish I was there for this past week, but I know you guys are going to continue to do such a great job and make such a great impact. And that's it. Just if more people just adopted that mindset, and I like how you touched on it as we wrap this up. I don't want to go too deep here, but just making a big impact on one person at a time. I think we lose sight of
Yeah.
it. And if we don't have 10 million followers or we don't have the platform of Steph Curry, it's sometimes hard for us to justify or to make that investment into one person. I'm like, you don't know. I don't think people realize the impact that one small gesture, one small commitment into helping one person can do. That one gesture can then lead on to many, many kind acts, many, many positive acts just by planting that seed. And I think if we could attack that mindset harder, I think we'd see a lot more change in this world. And you guys do such a great job at it. So really, really thankful for you guys, and excited to see what all the good things come from your camp and all the cool things you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, man. We've known each other a good amount of time now, and you're doing great work. So it's awesome to chat with you, brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for coming on the show, man. This has been awesome.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure, Doug. Thanks.